Welcome to the Star Life TV channel. In this video, I will talk about the strange circumstances of the death of Elizabeth II and the symbolic moments at her funeral. On September 8, 2022, it became known that Queen Elizabeth II of Great Britain died. Her eldest son, Prince Charles, became the new monarch. It would seem that at the age of 96 the Queen went to another world. There is nothing strange. Given the average life expectancy of a person, this event was quite expected and predictable. Nevertheless, many of the circumstances of the death of Elizabeth II are very strange, and the funeral of the monarch, which was attended by almost all the heads of state, was not without symbolism. Messages about the death of Elizabeth II appeared on September 8, 2022. The sum of the digits of this date gives 23, which is one of the system codes. This number is called the code for calling Satan. Since when dividing 2 by 3, we get 0.666, which is the number of the beast. Someone may argue with the fact that a person does not choose the date of death. This is true. But you can announce the death at any time. According to some reports, Elizabeth II was no longer alive, and at all official events and ceremonies, a double or a hologram was present instead of her. During the farewell ceremony, the coffin was always closed, and therefore no one can say with certainty that it was Elizabeth who was in it. If this is indeed the case, then the question arises why Buckingham Palace made an official announcement about the Queen's death just now. There may be several reasons for this. Firstly, against the backdrop of recent events in the world and Britain, dissatisfaction with the fall in living standards, the incompetence of politicians and high electricity prices is ripening. The departure of the monarch shifts people's attention away from these problems and serves as a kind of red herring for most people in England. The death of the Queen is associated with a real personal tragedy. People lined up in long queues to say goodbye to Elizabeth II. Many spent more than 30 hours in queues. Fainted in order to see the closed coffin from a distance of several meters. Naturally, in moments of mourning, the people of Britain were little bothered by the current problems of the country. Secondly, the death of a monarch has a sacred meaning. This is a commemoration of a certain transition, the end of one era and the beginning of another. It is quite possible that in the near future the world will change dramatically, and the death of the Queen will become a kind of symbol of these changes. The direction in which the world will change can be judged by the parade in honor of the proclamation of the former Prince of Wales by King Charles III. It was held in the Welsh capital on the 13th of September. From the City Hall to the castle marched the Royal Regiment of the Welsh in the amount of 26 people. The Kashmiri goat led the procession. Since ancient times, the goat has been a symbol of the devil himself. The goat face can be seen on the statue of Baphomet, which is the main symbol of Satanists. The funeral of Elizabeth II took place on September 19, 2022. This is the 23rd day in the lunar calendar in the zodiac sign Cancer. Thus, we again see the number 23, which contains 3 sixes. Given that 9 is an inverted 6, 3 sixes are also present in the date itself. The funeral of Elizabeth II began with a ceremony at Westminster Abbey, which was attended by leaders of countries and royals from around the world. More than 500 heads of state took part in the funeral of the monarch and received personal invitations. The presidents of Russia and Belarus were not invited. Representatives of the world's elites began to gather in Westminster Abbey hours before the farewell ceremony began. Looking at the faces of those present, one can see that there was no sadness and sorrow on them at all. Most of the politicians were talking animatedly to each other, smiling and even laughing. Among those was US President Joe Biden. Such behavior may indicate that the reason for which they gathered was only a pretext. All those present at the farewell ceremony for the Queen were dressed in black. However, even with such a dress code, symbolism was manifested. So, on the head of many ladies there was a wide-brimmed hat, giving a reference to the cult of Saturn, and in the front rows one could see an elderly man with a black patch over one eye, which emphasized the symbolism of the all-seeing eye. The chess floor in Westminster Abbey catches the eye the most. This is one of the main symbols of the Illuminati, meaning the unity of good and evil. Usually it is laid out in Masonic lodges. The fact that the floor in the main church in London is precisely chess-colored suggests certain thoughts. When the camera showed the hall from above, one could see that its central part was made in the form of an inverted cross. At 10:30 local time, the Queen's coffin was taken out of the Palace of Westminster and loaded onto a special carriage. On it he was taken to the venue of the ceremony. Interestingly, the carriage with the body of the Queen was dragged by sailors. They held onto huge chains and seemed to be chained to the coffin. This ritual can symbolically show the lack of freedom of ordinary people. The funeral procession proceeded from the palace to the abbey. She was accompanied by the children and grandchildren of the Queen, as well as representatives of various branches of the British troops. This moment of the ceremony was reminiscent of footage from the Belgian singer Stromae's video for the song Fils de Joie, which was released a few months earlier. He seemed to predict the events of the day. In the video, we see a son who buries his mother, heads of various states who came to see the deceased on her last journey, as well as a parade of troops. It is quite possible that the artist's video was a kind of programming of future events. By 11 a.m., the coffin was taken to Westminster Abbey and placed on a retractable podium. All this happened to the singing of the church choir, most of which for some reason were children. The service was headed by Dean of the University of Windsor David Connor. All the clergy were dressed in red, white and black, which matches the favorite colors of the Illuminati. At the end of the service, the coffin with the body of the Queen was taken out of the church and sent on her last journey around London. Initially, the sailors also pulled the wagon with the coffin. Then the body was moved to the hearse. To say goodbye to the monarch, people queued for a day and spent the night at the fences. Many of them lost consciousness from overwork. After the funeral procession finally passed the Queen's loyal subjects, people in central London were not allowed to disperse for more than an hour. As a result, panic began and several dozen Britons chanted, "Let us out." By 4 p.m., the coffin was again taken to Westminster Abbey, where the funeral service began. After church ceremonies, the scepter, the orb and the imperial state crown were removed from the coffin of the Queen. After that, Charles III placed the symbol of the royal company on the coffin, and the Lord Chamberlain broke his service baton, which allegedly means the end of the reign of Elizabeth II. In fact, this ritual can give a reference to the lines from the Gospel, "He will not break a bruised reed and he will not quench a smoking flax," who, in imitation of the Lord, treats people with compassion. He does not allow that one who is bruised by sin to break completely. In this case, we see that the cane is completely broken, which means that sin has taken over the person. Before the coffin was lowered into the tomb, Archbishop Justin Welby said the following words, "All who follow the Queen's example and are inspired by trust and faith in God can say with her, 'We will meet again.'" These words sound quite creepy, as if hinting that the Queen's consciousness has moved to another body, and in this way she will continue her earthly life. At this, the official farewell ceremony for Elizabeth II, which was broadcast live on all British channels, ended. However, after 3 hours, the Queen, along with her husband Prince Philip, who went to another world a year earlier, were to be removed from the tomb and transferred to the Memorial Chapel of King George VI. This has already been done without the presence of guests and cameras. In fact, the funeral that people watched was a kind of performance, after which the coffin was taken out again. This moment again gives a reference to the Stromae, Fils de Joie video, in which, after the funeral, the coffin appeared in the same place. One can only guess what rituals accompanied the real funeral of Elizabeth, and given the fact that no one has ever seen the Queen in the coffin, there are even more questions. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel. Put likes.